Hi, and welcome to our webinar. I'm Carol from Sunset Learning here. I'm from marketing, and I'm here today with Dr. James Stanger. He has consulted with corporate and government leaders worldwide about cybersecurity, emerging technologies, open source, and workforce development for over 25 years. Yeah, we have an expert in the house. And he's currently Chief Technology Evangelist at CompTIA. And we are very happy to have him presenting. Thank you, James.
Welcome, everybody. I'm James Stanger. Greetings from Seattle, Washington. I'm actually here in Olympia, Washington, but I usually tell people Seattle because nobody knows where Olympia, Washington is. I think that most people barely know where Seattle is. So greetings. I'm curious where you are all joining in from. So if you could let me know what part of the world, what part of the country, whatever you are joining in from, that would be very helpful because today we're going to be talking about network transport. So here we go. We got Brazil. We got Colorado. How you doing, Colorado? I'll be flying over you here next week. I'll be on my way to Tennessee, talking to a bunch of CIOs and CISOs. Hey, Chicago, how you doing? So it's great to be here, everyone. Who else? Belgium. I think you get the award. I don't know which is further, Belgium or Brazil. I think Brazil's probably further. So we've got an international crowd here. So Denver, how you doing? And Boise, Idaho. I got a kid. Who's going to be going back to school, not in Boise, but in Rexburg, Idaho, which is, relatively close, I think. Pennsylvania, good to see you. Well, so folks, we have been taking advantage, even as we speak, of network transport. Now, how about that for a fancy phrase? That is a phrase that I stole from a general who I spoke with in Frankfurt, Germany, this last December. And the reason I bring this up is because he said, everybody loves to talk about the cloud and they want to, in my words, stampede into the cloud and do cool things, which is great. He said, the things that people forget are the importance of making sure that we have a good enough network to handle the cloud, right? Can you handle the truth, as Jack Nicholson would say decades ago? Well, can we handle the cloud when it comes to networking? So what I want to talk about today are important networking concepts that are useful to the cloud. Okay. And take a look at this picture. It's a picture I took not too long ago, here about a month and a half, about 2 months ago. That is the Duomo in Florence. And that looks like just your kind of standard, cathedral. Congratulations, James. You took a picture of a cathedral. Hey, Virginia, good to have you here. And there's already a question. Yes, it is being recorded. And you can get access to that recording later on, Nicholas. Good question. And at the end of this presentation, two things. One, you're going to get a QR code. If you trust QR codes, you can hold your phone up to it, right? And you can download the slides. You'll get the slides and a recording later to this from Sunset Learning. And there's also a really cool gift, as Carol put it, at the end. So make sure you got that. So make sure you stay for that. But that's the Duomo in Florence. And that is, you're looking at the apex, really, in some ways of the Renaissance, believe it or not. The engineering, the technique, and the vision it took to create that dome out of brick is absolutely breathtaking. I think most of us have heard of the Renaissance, right? Well, you are looking at the poster child of the Renaissance, right? Why do I bring this up? Because the incredible engineering and thought that was put together. Well, that put that together is something to really think about, because it had never been done before, the idea of taking brick and making it possible to meet them all up. Most people would have messed it up. You set up the bricks and it would go this way or that way. The feat of engineering is amazing. Well, you could argue when it comes to the cloud, when it comes to networking, the ability of people like John Postel, that's a name, or Vint Cerf, who's still alive, the pioneers who put together networking, TCP/IP. Vint Cerf helped create the TCP protocol. Is I'm not saying it's as amazing necessarily as the Duomo, but it is definitely, from a networking and cloud perspective, a similar feat of achievement. My name is James. I've done a lot of work as a company president. I've also worked as a security analyst. I've worked in the cloud doing migrations, helping do that. I've helped I've consulted with organizations from Northrop Grumman to AstraZeneca and others about those sorts of things. So it's good to be talking with you today. And let's talk about some steps that we go along the way in understanding that network transport, as this one general put it, right? Kind of some of the things that we're facing, some of the cool things that are happening and how important networking is to it, what's at stake, and then some pathways for your learning. Okay, so let's move on here. Now we're talking about networking, but I think it's really important to understand that in context. And this picture here that I took, I'm not much of a photographer, but I took that of a transport mechanism. In this case, it's not a transport for people necessarily. It's not really a transport for cars or anything like that. That's water transport. You're looking at a viaduct built by the Romans around, I think, 100 to 200 ACE. So you're talking about 2,000 years ago. It brought water about 12 miles in Spain from the hills in Spain down into Segovia, Spain. That's where I was. And I think it's really important to think about what supports this. Well, pillars, right? Well, we have pillars of IT at CompTIA. We did a lot of research and we basically said, to give people a context of where things are. We thought we would divide all of IT, all of tech into 4 different areas. Now, there are nuances here that this little image doesn't show, but I think it's important to start from somewhere. There's infrastructure. You can see where it has infrastructure, it has security, it has development and data. Those are the 4 pillars. You could argue, is there a 5th pillar? 5th pillar meaning AI. I don't know. I can't tell the future. If I did, I would be delivering this from an island that I own somewhere. But I can say this. I would probably say that AI is going to be informing each of those 4 areas, right? That infrastructure will change and processes will change and skills will change because of the influence of AI, obviously. I'm not sure that it deserves its own pillar though, but hey, if it does, that's great. What I want to point out is that when it comes to the cloud, obviously we're talking infrastructure, cloud, data center, on-premise, the telcos, networking, automation, all of those areas. Cybersecurity, you could argue, deserves its own pillar. Development, meaning creation of code, deserves its own pillar, as it were, is in its own pillar. And then data, turning random data into information. But I want to focus here on, what networking is. And check out this little slide. I think it's kind of nice to get a little bit of context. This slide is meant to show about 90% of the careers that exist right now. I work for the research department at CompTIA, and we did some research and we distilled down all the myriad job role titles. I mean, there's hundreds of them, right? You could argue even thousands, but hundreds of them. And we kind of distilled it down and said, here's about 90% right now that's happening. In 6 months, it might change, whatever. But you'll notice there are networking job roles in here. Network administration, if you go on the left-hand column about 10 down, network administrator, network engineer, right? All of this mixed in or associated with the cloud. And I want to talk today about what some of the essential skills are. But before then, my mom always taught me, if you don't tell a story during a presentation, James, it won't go so well. It won't be as cool. I'm like, okay. So here's my attempt at a story. You should be, hopefully you're seeing my screen. You should be seeing an escalator. That is an escalator in Waterloo Station in London. Okay. The reason I show you that is because we had my wife and I were going up that, and what happened? She was accidentally pushed down that escalator and she fell horribly, broke her arm really badly. It was a cold day. And after she broke her arm, what was she doing there? She was lying upside down, as the escalator was going down, down, and she had a scarf around her neck, and the scarf got caught in the escalator. You know how that goes? And it was slowly starting to choke her, right? Nothing. I was pulling on it. I was trying to tear the scarf. Sometime, in your ample spare time, try to tear a scarf while you're terrified. It doesn't work really well. It was a big, thick scarf. The reason why I put in here this is because as I was in a panicked way trying to figure this out to keep my wife from being choked by the scarf that was around her neck while she couldn't move, the escalator stopped. Okay. Now, why did it stop? For a long time, I used to think somebody standing at the bottom of the escalator pushed the stop button, right? Because if you look at most escalators, there's a panic button, a stop button, or whatever. That didn't happen, folks. Um, it was stopped by somebody who was remotely watching the webcam. They must have noticed some sort of tussle or some sort of problem. I don't know if AI was watching that, if it was a person watching that, if some sort of alarm, whatever. But my point is that networking saved my family. How? Because somebody was watching via a webcam, and using network technology stopped that escalator from choking my wife to death, and allowed us to get to the hospital, where, as you can see, we set her arm. Now, she had to get surgery for that arm. But what I want to point out here is the technology that made it possible for things to get better. Obviously, medical training. Network transport was huge. After all, how could I get a picture of that broken arm, right, to show to you, right? It was emailed, right? It was, or whatever it was transferred via, I think, some sort of HTTP. But there was operational technology involved. How? Well, obviously stopping the escalator and also running that X-ray machine. There was cybersecurity involved. There are privacy issues involved here. My point is the cloud made that possible, but also network transport. And what we're finding at CompTIA in our research is that we're in a cloud smart hybrid world. Now, you may already know that, and that's great. But my point is, we start with the cloud in most cases, but there's always going to be a reason why we still use data centers and still use installed or enterprise or on-premise, however we want to call that. It's the trifecta. We need networking to connect all three of those things. So I'm going to talk for pretty much the rest of this time talking about the unique networking skills that make it possible for us to connect this hybrid cloud data center on-premise kind of world. Fair enough? So as we talk about in the future about AI, artificial intelligence, all the cool stuff, you can't lose track of the fact we need good networking people to do that. Because what we're facing are kind of asymmetric technologies. This is a picture I took of somebody's pet dog. Can you see that pet dog? It's a robot. Okay. That's a robot. It's an IoT device, maybe an operational technology device, depending on how you want to define it. And this was crossing the street. Well, how could it cross the street? Well, James, it has sensors. It has a CPU. It has all sorts of great things. It connects probably to the cloud. But what it was doing is it was connecting to 5G networking. It was connecting to a 5G cellular network. You know what we use on our phones, if we're lucky enough to have 5G? Well, without network transport, that dog is going to end up in some sort of dog pound, right? It's going to end up in the lack of connectivity dog pound, and it will become just kind of a useless bunch of metal. So what we're facing here from a security perspective, there's, we have all sorts of attack surfaces, right? But I just want to focus on the networking side. And this is the dog. I was able to pet the dog, actually. There's the person who was running the dog. But that dog doesn't just have to be around that person, minding it. It was definitely done remotely. And we are in a data fabric Web 3.0 world. Take a look at this old picture. That's one of the a map of some of the early telegraph connections. That's the internet of old, 100 or 120 years ago, right? Well, things have changed since those days of lighthouses and things. And we've got radio technology. We have things like the Tokyo Tower, which was built in the 1950s. We have the Tokyo Skytree, which was built, maybe a decade ago, a little over a decade now. We have essential services that provide services that businesses use to provide customer experience to stay alive, right? We have networks that have our identities in them, much less the identity of some sort of robotic dog, right? We have decision making. So we have data aggregation happening around the world, whether it be from our mobile phones or the IoT wearable devices we're using every day. All this data ends up somewhere. It has to be collected or aggregated. It's put up where? Well, probably into some sort of data lake, right? And by the way, that is a lake called Helvellyn. And I couldn't help it when I took that picture of going, oh, looky there. There's a data lake in the clouds. Get it? Lame joke. Sorry, but I like it. The reason why I'm showing you this is because it's very important. I'm not going to be talking to you about the cloud. I'm not going to be talking to you about access methods or necessarily, but I am going to be talking about network and distribution methods today. Because as we use cool data lakes, or as we use Amazon SageMaker and AI, or things like Amazon Detective, we still need a lot of networking. And here's the first kind of mic drop moment, if there is one here. I was talking to a guy named Mike Garrity here not too long ago. In fact, it was in September of last year. And he said this. He said, we're finding that we're spending at least 50% of an employee's time just training them in the first year of their employment. And I asked him, what are you training them in? He says, because a lot of these people he hires as security professionals or as sometimes data professionals or IT professionals to work in the cloud. And he said, or at least work on that trifecta, cloud, data center, and install on premise. And he said, they don't know their networking as much as they should. They really don't know a lot of this stuff. And I'm like, well, why do you think that is? He says, well, people want to, run to the latest and greatest technology so they can get a great paying job. So they focus on, the whiz bang stuff, and they forget that the whiz bang stuff is reliant on a foundation of networking. And he said this, he said, you can't work on a network if you don't know how a network works. Right? So I don't care if you use on-prem. I don't care if you use the cloud. I don't care if you use, I do care if you use data centers, but I do very much want you to understand the importance of what it means to have your networking ducks in a row. So let's talk about some first steps, right, that we can take along the way. And you're looking at, see 3 pictures there. I do a lot of travel. Let's see, one of those, one on the my right is I took that in Jamaica. The one in the middle I took in Spain, and that one on the left I just took in South Africa last week. And in those travels that I've taken, every single industry leader I've spoken to, and I've spoken to industry leaders in all 3 of those countries, continents, however you want to look at it, have emphasized the importance of network transport or networking. Cybersecurity, that's fine, but they said there's a gap here. And I'm not just going to say there's a skills gap. It's more than that. I think there's a gap in people's understanding of their foundations and of networking. And so that's why I'm here to kind of help you mind that gap. It's a picture I took when I was in England. And if you've ever been in England, in the UK before, you get onto the underground or you get on the trains, and there's always a voice saying, mind the gap. And it's the gap between the train and the platform that you step down onto. Well, that gap has to do with networking, and we need people like you to fill that gap and make it possible for us to do that. So our job first is to take the magic out of networking. And by magic, I think there's a lot of the assumption that if you're working in something that, well, layer 3 person, if you guys know what I'm talking about in terms of technology, there's the OSIRM. I'll get to that in a second. We'll take care of everything, right? It's somebody else's problem. Well, it ain't somebody else's problem. Excuse me. It isn't somebody else's problem. It's your problem to understand this, because when you're working in an interdependent environment, when it comes to IT, you have to understand how the decisions you make affect others. And you have to understand that as you implement something, some sort of module or addition, service, microservice, whatever in the cloud, you very much need to understand the implications of that in terms of networking. Now, check out this picture. I took this picture. I probably should make a video of this. I have one, but usually videos don't translate real well into webinars. You're looking at something called Kinder Downfall. That's the name of this waterfall. It's a waterfall. But if you notice, if you look carefully at that picture, notice how the water's not going down. It's actually going up. Okay, that's because it's at the end of a huge canyon, and when the wind blows, which it does a lot in this area of the UK, it actually blows the water up the waterfall. I mean, and not just a little bit, a couple of feet up. I mean, hundreds of feet, or at least a couple hundred feet up the wrong way. And this is very much associated, has been at least traditionally, as a magical place in the UK. There's a pool at the bottom of this waterfall because eventually the water does actually fall, called the Mermaid's Pool. And in there, I think Jenny Greenteeth is said to live, and she will come along during a moonlit night, and you can see her. And if you're not careful, she'll woo you and to your death there. This has always been seen as kind of a magical place, because when was the last time you saw a waterfall happen? I'm telling this long story because any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I stole this from an author named Arthur C. Clarke. He came up with, he's one of the first people in real life to actually work on satellites. He also developed 2001, he wrote 2001, A Space Odyssey. it's our job to take the magic out of networking. Okay. Now let me show you something, another story. This was a question that was asked in a real live interview. So I didn't make this up. I didn't even get this from our research department. I actually got this from somebody who got a job. If you look at that picture, the top picture of those folks, these are folks from India. One of those persons actually, he said, that's one of the persons there, the guy at the back, he actually was asked this question in his job interview. So what happens when you visit, company.com or CompTIA.org, right? Well, what are they asking you? I mean, and can you answer the question? What does DNS do? For example, a networking protocol, right? Does it primarily resolve names to IP addresses or IP addresses to names? Now, it's kind of a trick question, right? Because DNS does both, but primarily it resolves names that you type in like www.comptia.org or sunsetlearning.org, right? And then it resolves it to an IP address, either IPv4 or IPv6. How intelligently can you answer this question? And when they push you in an interview, can you answer questions like, well, do you know what recursion is in DNS? What port is used, right? UDP, TCP, when, right? Because there's two answers to that. Do you understand the concept of the order of resolution? Now, I bring this up because that one person in India that you see that picture was asked that question. So were some of the students in Japan there, right? Trust me, in the US or whether you're in Belgium or whatever, Arizona, San Diego, Pennsylvania, no matter where you are from, Brazil, you're going to be asked similar questions. And how well can you answer that question? Because they really want to know, do you have that foundation? A friend of mine named Bob Venier has worked for a lot of companies, AstraZeneca, Northrop Grumman. He once said that cloud technology, right, cloud offerings change about every 3 weeks. But he said the way that you keep your value as a worker is to understand the foundations of networking. So now I've quoted a person from both in the US this time, a person. Oh, actually, I quoted a person from India, didn't I? But I quoted somebody who is in the government in New Jersey for the state of New Jersey, and also somebody who's in the private sector working for major. So these are hiring people who are ready to ask you these questions, and they want smart answers from you. Okay. So, but I want you to make sure that you understand the importance of understanding that these hiring managers, especially at the bottom, these hiring managers are asking the same questions. They want to know your networking foundations. So as far as next steps are concerned, first thing is, you know your protocols, right? TCP/IP, DNS, DHCP. Do you understand those things? Because as information is coming to the cloud or whatever, you need to understand things like IPv4, IPv6, okay? And when it comes to IPv4 and IPv6, I think one of the first things to think about is this. IPv4, most people, IPv6, they'll say, well, it gives a bigger IP address space. And it does, right? And that's great. But the real benefit of IPv6 and understanding networking is that it basically allows routers to do their job the way they should do them. In other words, routers, their job is to make sure packets get from one network to the next. In IPv4, routers are asked to do a lot more than that. And that's one reason why you have things like congestion. So in understanding protocols, it's really important to understand deeper and getting into the nuances of these protocols. Okay. Here's the TCP handshake, 3 steps, right? There's the SYN, SYN-ACK, and ACK. This is such an important foundational thing to learn. Another thing having to do with DNS, right? And I'm not saying you have to understand the concept of the reputation necessarily of DNS, but to understand the elements there. Here is DHCP, right? The DORA, right? Discover, offer, request, and ACK, right? Discover D, right? Offer O, R, request, ACK, right? Really important concepts here because from a security perspective, but also from a network troubleshooting perspective, if you understand these kind of elements, you'll do well. More network protocols. You could argue this is kind of a security thing because you're looking at the steps that it takes to learn, steps that it takes to get SSL going, right? Or it's really transport layer security, TLS, but People still call it SSL. How well do you understand that particular dialogue? Because this is increasingly important from a networking perspective to understand, both in terms of providing, say, quality of service, understanding things like congestion, but also we're starting to live in more of a post-quantum world. And that's a fancy way of saying a lot of the network technologies and encryption technologies that we've been using for a long time, they're getting a little old. And some of them are going to have to be updated. We need networking professionals to understand and troubleshoot some of these elements. Here is another networking protocol. It's called HTTP. You're looking at the unencrypted HTTP. Web stuff, right? Well, how does a web browser or an application on your phone use HTTP? It's very important when it comes to understanding the quality of service that needs to be provided. And there's also HTTPS. So understanding how servers and clients, whether it be in a typical client server or in end tier or in cloud-based connections, very important in understanding how this works. So before you run in from a security perspective to use tools like Burp Suite, which is a funnily named little application that allows you to kind of listen in on connections from a security perspective. You can steal stuff like session IDs. It's very important to understand that you are listening in on languages, HTTP as it were. It's not necessarily a language, but it's a way that networks talk. There's HTTP, there's SSL, DHCP. You're listening in on these kinds of, as it were, conversations, right? And you have to know these things. Getting a bit deeper, DNS, right? I think the real thing you've got to think about here is how DNS works, right? UDP port 53, whenever we do resolving on a normal basis, when you go up to CompTIA.org, that's how it works. But there's also zone transfers. And one of the things that's really important from a networking perspective is understanding what it means to put together, right? Your own kind of network play space. And Sunset Learning can do that for you. But I think one of the things that's really important is getting hands-on with this stuff. So you can talk about it in theory all day long, but can you spin up some sort of system and get your own little DNS server going? And see those instructions where it says sudo apt-get and install bind and all that? Those are actual steps that you're going to learn, and just a little examples of what it means to get DNS going. Now, obviously, there's layers 1 through 7 of the OSI-RM. And this is basically a model that's universal to anybody in understanding networks. The physical layer, meaning physical devices, whether it be the wire, if you use a wire, or the air in that case, but the actual devices that make it possible for you to get networking going, and all the way up to the application layer. But the thing that's really important when it comes to understanding your network technologies is that it kind of allows you to not only understand the geeky stuff, which I love, I think it's really understanding how networking makes it possible for human beings, the individual, the organization, and their policies, and how information works. Because you are, as a networking professional, going to be somebody that connects human beings to each other. And you have to understand the policy and the security implications of that. Well, let's get into some specifics here. Do you know how a packet capture works? In this case, you're looking at some ways in which Wireshark, a typical free open source tool, is used. When you look at these, you understand Ethernet, right? Packetization, how it works. There's address resolution protocol. Do you know what those things are? Because you're going to be asked those questions, whether it be in the cloud or elsewhere, eventually. You can start filtering by MAC addresses. And if you don't know what a MAC address is, then you'll run into problems. If you're doing troubleshooting, for example, there are tools that you can use within Wireshark. And there are many other tools that you'll see. Wireshark I just use because it's free. And a lot of organizations use it. And you'll also find that you can learn about various ways to see, well, if there's transmission protocol being used and it's doing a lot of retransmission, that could be an indicator of some sort of problem. Probably not a security problem, probably a network transport problem. Well, the training that you can get will teach you how to identify and troubleshoot those kinds of problems. Okay. You can even do endpoint analysis, and you could look at the different types and see who's the most talkative endpoint, whether it be a router, switch, server, mobile phone. on there, and you can start to kind of trace what's going on. In this case, you're kind of tracing, I'm kind of tracing down the location of a particular device, networking device that wasn't working particularly well. So what does it mean to bridge some of the gaps of networking? Okay. Well, for example, as a person I know, his name is Kash Awan. He works for AWS. He manages a team of AI engineers. And one of the things that he made sure people understood was understanding the implications of their development. And so he made sure, and others made sure that things like Network Plus, courses like Network Plus and Security Plus were used. Why? Well, because if you're going to use AI, it has to be transported from the cloud to where people are. So it's heavily reliant on network architecture. These people need to understand network troubleshooting and how to optimize traffic. Now, there's also some security elements in there, identity access management, access control, but really it comes down to a lot of different areas of understanding networking. Automation is another really important skill that has come to the fore, right? You talk about artificial intelligence, that's fine. I'll mention a few things later on. But the main thing is, if you are asked to automate something, in this case, you're looking at an Ansible script. This is called a playbook. Ansible, A-N-S, let's see what it is, I-B-L-E, Ansible. It's been around for years, 20 years, probably more. This is a playbook that in this case is simply launching some web servers, okay? And what it's not really launching them, it's updating some web servers. But you can create playbooks that can automate networking technologies. The updating of a router. You can do it, the updating of a network switch, okay? Or of endpoints, servers, to update their networking capabilities. So there are a lot of different ways in which those things are there. So again, here's Amazon SageMaker. To get to some sort of AI implementation that SageMaker does in terms of getting AI going, I think it's really important that you have to have your networking in a row. There's a lot of different type of networking that's going on. There's traditional networking, and then the idea of software-defined networking, or SDN. This slide, I'm simply trying to show how, when it comes to networking, as we've moved to the cloud, we've needed to get a bit more sophisticated in how we manage our networks. Part of that is moving, if not from IPv4 to IPv6, but using both, right, protocols. But it's also to kind of look to take networking to what I would say a different plane. And software-defined networking, basically what it does is it allows you to take traditional routers and switches and organize them into at least several to 3 different planes. And we're talking here about the control plane and the data plane. Data is simply where information is flowing, and control is the ability, the control plane is the ability of the routing switches, the routers and the switches as they're all networked together, to separate the command and control from the actual data that's being transported. Now, to fully understand this, won't go any more deeply into this, but to fully understand this, you've really got to know the basics of networking, right? Now, from a cybersecurity perspective, we asked about 500 people, hey, a very unfair question. We asked people, hey, what is the most important thing that will really help you with your cybersecurity? And people gave their answers. And you'll notice they talked about application security, they talked about data security, and notice 14% said network monitoring. Now, if you add up the biggest parts of this circle, so you got the whole circle, now you have these 3 little wedges there. Network monitoring, data security, and application security. What you're really talking about is the ability to monitor how applications are running across the network in real time. So kind of real-time analysis of how applications are talking. That's why I mentioned understanding how HTTP works, how HTTPS works with encryption, things like that. The data security side and the network monitoring side, these are also closely related. So you're really talking over half of the respondents, of the 500 respondents, are basically talking about elements that have a really strong foundation in networking knowledge. And if you don't have that networking knowledge, you're not going to be able to deliver application security, data security, and network monitoring as much as you should. And I think that's just really important to think about. So along your learning pathway, I want you to think about a couple of things. I think a lot of us are worried a bit about AI. right? Will AI, won't that replace foundational networking? I mean, if networking transport is such a basic thing or foundational thing, won't AI, make that unimportant? And the answer is no, actually. We need people to understand how networking works so that we can automate repetitive skills. This whole slide, if you take a look at it, is the whole job, the whole idea behind AI really is to get rid of repetitive skills and automate those in some level. And if you understand how networks operate, you can help organizations automate repetitive skills. So I don't think unique skills will be replaced by AI anytime soon. Certain things will, obviously. The importance of communication, the ability to pivot. I think those three things, unique skills, communication, the ability to pivot. I think those are extremely important considerations. So take a look at that picture. I actually took that picture in South Korea. It's in South Korea. It's a robot going around cleaning stuff up. So you're looking at kind of a version of Roomba there, kind of industrial strength. And I was talking to one of the Roomba's coworkers, and I said, "Are you worried about this thing taking your job away or whatever?" And she said, "No, because it does the basic stuff, and I'm able to go and do more important things." I think you're going to find that with AI. If you have the basics right, it will allow you to understand and get context to learn more essential skills. And I think that's really important from a networking perspective, because if you just assume, well, something else will take care of that, it could be that your job could get replaced if you don't learn additional things. And you won't be able to learn additional things if you don't have the foundation. Okay. So let's see here on the next slide here. The priorities for AI when it comes to understanding networking, for example, is it's all job roles are going to need to use AI, right? But you'll notice there are certain areas where AI is going to be, really important. And there's that automation element. And remember earlier when I was telling you about that friend of mine, Mike, who said, look, you can't protect networks or work on networks if you don't know how they work. I think if you're going to use AI, you've got to know what can be automated. You've got to know the elements that you're working with. And so if you're going to use AI for automation, which is one of the major skills out there, you've got to know your networking. Here are the top 4 areas where a lot of AI is going to be valued. Okay. So data management, cybersecurity, and then look at there, IT infrastructure. That definitely includes the cloud, definitely includes networking, but cybersecurity also implies networking. And notice where it says data management. Now, part of that is becoming a data professional, and that's fine, but part of that is also making sure the data ends up where it should. And so this is where all of these areas you can see where networking is at the foundation of, and it's not something that can just be automated away anytime soon. So when it comes to understanding your future as a networking professional or as, say, a cloud professional, I think it's really important to understand that AI and human interaction. So that point between the two fingers, right? The AI finger, robotics one, and the human, where can we really learn how to do real strong networking, real strong technical, understand how we can contribute from a technical perspective. Earlier, I showed you for things like Wireshark. Earlier, I showed you some troubleshooting types of things, understanding various protocols from DNS to DHCP, all those things. I think it's really important to understand how much you need to understand one thing, right? And how AI can help. This picture here I've always liked because it's I don't know, you have to show me what you see there, because you can see two different things, right? You can see two faces looking at each other. Do you see that? Or you can see the cup, right? To me, when it comes to kind of a perfect balance or really getting something done, in other words, the cup, two people achieving something, I think when it comes to understanding networking, it's understanding those foundations and understanding how a network operates that enables you to create a true, you could call it a convergence if you wish. You could call it a sense of, if not togetherness, but a sense of achievement and accomplishment. And I think that's where you have to know your networking really well. There's a person named lived a couple 2,400 years ago, Socrates, who talked exactly about this dialogue between, and he talked about in terms of two people. But I think what you're going to find, whether it be as a networking professional or a cloud professional or a security professional, for you to have a constructive dialogue with your coworkers about network troubleshooting, about certain elements, I think you have to really be informed in that. So in this way, AI can do a lot of that repetitive work, right? But human beings then contribute a unique value. And I think that's really important. Another real quick story. It's you could call it a myth, you call it a folk story about a person who actually lived. His name was John Henry, and he got in a competition, right, in digging tunnel, right, with a steam drill. A steam drill does things automatically, right? And if you remember the story, who won? John Henry actually won that competition, right? But it was kind of a Pyrrhic victory because he died of a heart attack immediately thereafter. What does this have to do with anything? Think of your skills as a networking professional. How can you add unique value? Because if John Henry had said, I'm going to let that steam drill do its thing, and then I'm going to add on at the end a unique value, he probably would have lived through it, and you can work with automated tools. The reason I bring this up is that there's a lot of networking skill that 20 years ago, human beings had to do it. Nowadays, a lot of that is automated. Does that mean we need fewer networking professionals? If you look out to the hiring and to the hiring people who are hiring, there are more jobs available for networking professionals now than there were back then. So automation has not eliminated jobs. And I want to show you something, or at least I'll put it up here. I'll put it into the chat window. If you open up the chat window, you can check out cyberseek.org, and you can also look at another resource. It's called CyberStates. At least I call it cyberstates.org. We've kind of changed things around. But you can check out some really cool resources that will show you the types of skills that people need. If you go to cyberseek.org, that focuses on cybersecurity, but you will see, if you look through any of the job role descriptions, how important it is to have your network knowledge. So, because those same people who are hiring you for a cloud job or for cybersecurity, they're going to be asking you networking questions. So as you go and do your career research, right, check out a couple of resources. I've already given you two, right? There's cyberseek.org, and then there's the State of the Tech Workforce. We used to call that CyberState. But check out the State of Cybersecurity 2024 report. Pretty cool report because it talks about the problems of cybersecurity and how to resolve them. And the answer really is to focus on better upskilling people, better policy and processes. And we add in there products. And one of those things is understanding the importance not only of AI and cybersecurity and data, but once again, networking, how important that is. There's also the State of the Tech Workforce. I gave you a URL to that, right? But there are pathways that you can take to these unique skills, the non-repeatable skills, the important foundational skills that you can use to work with other workers, with AI, or what have you. So whether you're working with Cisco tools or Dell or Fortinet or all the different tools that are out there, Juniper, there are pathways that you can take to understand these things. CompTIA, we have those. We have the infrastructure pathway. Remember those 4 pillars? The infrastructure pathway, cybersecurity, and data. We're coming up with software and also things having to do with AI. If you want, you can network with me. There's 2 types of networking, right? Technical networking and networking with people. If you have any questions about some of the things that are available when it comes to network technologies, happy to connect with you on LinkedIn. You can obviously do some really cool stuff with Sunset Learning. But there's my LinkedIn. If you want to join in, it'd be great. There's a few articles I've written over time. But here is one of the cool things that we are prepared to offer for you today, CompTIA in conjunction with Sunset Learning. Check out this code. See if I got it right. Did I get it right, Carol? 2, and that's a 0, right? Or 20TT, right? So this code lasts for a little while, right? It lasts through, let's see, 7/19. Last I saw that would be July 19th. Okay, so you're talking just over a month, right? where you can get 20% off of CompTIA training. And that includes A plus, Cloud plus, Network plus, right? Which is really what I've focused on today's presentation, Security plus, and then CompTIA ITF plus, which we'll be calling that Tech plus pretty soon. Now, the reason why we made it possible for this 20% discount to not just be on Network Plus is we realized that there are a lot of adjacent job roles and a lot of adjacent or nearby skills that people need to get, because you need to get into this profession in the right way. A plus teaches a bit of networking, but it teaches also how endpoints work in the first place, from storage to CPU to operating system and that sort of thing. Cloud Plus kind of, in a sense, builds on that, saying, well, here's how all those things get virtualized and democratized and put together. But Network Plus is how all of those elements talk to each other. So I always like to say that Network Plus kind of gives the language of connectivity between all of the different modes of computing, whether it be data centers, on-premise, or the cloud. We also offer with Security Plus and ITF. So you need to kind of enter into your pathway where it makes sense for you. You could be going, well, I'm pretty, I know I'm pretty advanced here. So, Network Plus looks interesting. I need to, to get some of those, how should I put it? I need to get some of those skills put in place so that I can then move on and learn more things like Security Plus, for example. But other people might go, well, look, I'm just starting out. I don't know. You've been talking about networking, James, and it all looks really cool, but maybe I need to start a little bit earlier. And when I say earlier, I don't mean, don't worry about, I should have done this when I was 5 years old or 12 years old. No, I mean earlier in terms of, well, I need to understand how things work at a basic level. So I'm going to start with ITF plus. Nevertheless, however you want to start, we want to make it possible to remove any barriers to entry for you. In terms of getting started. Now, on the chat window, Carol's done a great job of putting in a URL here that shows the different types of courses that you can take, and you can just click on that URL and start your learning journey, however you want to work that. Now, if you want to download these slides, check them out. Here is the QR code. I think I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, so that you can check that out. If you don't trust QR codes, you can type in that really ugly long URL there. Some people don't trust QR codes or tiny URL codes, so they want to start from the beginning. However you want to work it. And if you don't want to do it this way, you can contact Carol, the folks at Sunset Learning, and get things going there. So there is the QR code. And I want to thank you very much for the time that you've spent with us at CompTIA and Sunset Learning. Our job at CompTIA is to help people upskill, right? And whether it be managers who are upskilling their people, or whether it be individuals looking to upskill to either enter or move on or up in the world in terms of their IT space. I think it's just, we're here to help do that, because we're a member-driven nonprofit organization, and we do what our members ask us to do, because our members are the IT industry. And so whether it be government, private sector, even academics, we listen very carefully to what industry wants us to do. And the industry has told us networking is a really important thing. It can kind of get neglected, strangely, shouldn't be. And so that's one reason why Sunset Learning and CompTIA are kind of getting together presenting this. Now, let's see. Boy, I've talked for a long time. It's 10:50. I'm curious if there are any questions that folks have in terms of the importance of networking, network troubleshooting, understanding some of the things that we've discussed today, or at least I've presented on today. Let's see. So there is, I just clicked on the CompTIA link you provided in the chat and then selected CompTIA Cloud Plus. Out of curiosity, are they suitable for people living in a different time zone in the USA? Nicholas, that's a great question. Yes. Yes, we definitely offer those courses to happen, because a couple of different ways to look at it. First of all, if you're looking at instructor-led, Sunset Learning can help you with that. Right. The other thing, if you do it online, obviously you can take that and do it however you wish. So yeah, well, we can definitely accommodate you there. So Yeah, absolutely. Good question. Good question. Let's see. And what I'll do is I'll add in that URL and repeat it one more time so you can check that out. And Nicholas, the best thing that you can do, yeah, so Carol will get that going there. We'll get that going for you, and a sales rep can work out the details. Yes, Darrell, and forgive me if I've messed up your name. With a last name like Stanger, you'd think I'd do a better job of being sensitive to folks' names. But it's a great question. OSPF, open shortest. One of these days, I'll learn how to talk. Open shortest path first, OSPF. That's a routing protocol. And that's a routing protocol that's a universal one. And so, yes, you'll find it in Cisco CCNA, and you'll, of course, find it in Network Plus. And I think that's interesting you bring that up, Darrell, because when it comes to protocols such as OSPF, they're not owned by any one vendor. For example, Juniper Networking, Cisco, open source tools, all will use OSPF. And one thing that you can do is go in and just type in this RFC. I'll just even type editor, right? You can just do that. In fact, I'll show you the URL here real quick. There's this concept called request for comments, RFC. And I'll just type that in to here. And you can look at the RFC-editor. There are requests for comments documents. You got to understand that when it comes to networking, the networking protocols that we know and love and use every day and mess around with and customize and all that were created through a public process. So no one company made them, no one government made them. There are dozens, if hundreds, of companies and dozens of governments and just thousands of people that contribute to the RFCs. These RFCs define the protocols. So when I said earlier that, what's his name, Vint Cerf came up with TCP, well, he and many others, okay, created that. It's a public process. It's a fascinating process. So individuals from around the world contribute to it. So it's not one individual who does this, or even just 10 companies. The reason I bring this up is that OSPF was created that way. You can actually go up to RFC editor. Oh, I got your name right away. Good, Terrell. Sorry, this is cool. If you click on the RFC editor, you can actually type in OSPF, and you can see when it was created. And so there's a whole process. At first, it's investigatory, and then it's like, well, we're developing it, and then we develop the first version of OSPF, and then it gets modified from then on. But this is basically the documentation of all the networking protocols that we know and love every day. And it's really cool to see that. And so this is my long-winded way of talking about that it's not just owned by, let's say, Cisco, or just owned by any other organization. So yeah, you'll find OSPF used and described in detail in Network Plus, because we focus on the public domain, as it were, protocols and procedures and best practices that are found. And that's one of the great things that you'll find with Network Plus, is that it's a fantastic stepping stone to the multiple vendor world. People will use the term vendor neutral. That's fine. I think it's a multiple vendor world. You walk in and you're going to see networking devices provided by telcos, and by telcos like Avaya, for example. If you're in Europe, there's Orange, right? That's Orange networking, right? There are just so many different devices that you're going to be messing around with. Cisco devices, obviously, Juniper, there's just so many. And so it's understanding how all of those different vendors work and play well together. And that's one of the great benefits of Network Plus. I probably should have put that in the presentation, shouldn't I? So I'm glad that came up. So, and that's cool. Yeah. Yeah. OSPF is a cool little routing protocol, because what it does is it allows routers to update each other. And there are all sorts of different protocols. Back in the day, there was RIP and RIP2, and there's OSPF, and I think OSPF2. There are dozens of routing protocols, but all routers have a table, right? And that table is basically kind of their understanding of who they're connected with. And they can update each other's tables if they're allowed to. And that allows the internet to work and play well in that kind of internet connectivity dance. And so when it comes to OSPF, that's one of the ways that routers can communicate with each other. And there's so many different types of protocols. OSPF is something designed for routers in a wide area networks. but they're also much more sophisticated and heavy duty protocols that allow routers who are peering on the internet. So there's routers that peer with each other at a very high level. And then when you talk at the company level, that company being a very large or very small company, OSPF is kind of there, and there are other protocols that are used. So I'm glad you brought that up, Darrell. Well, let's see, we've got 4 minutes left. So I probably will go about once again, thanking you, and thank you for the questions there about OSPF and others. I really, and Nicholas, your question about Cloud Plus, really appreciate it, man. Let me know, again, if you want, you can connect, you can download the slides here. The other thing you can do is connect with me on LinkedIn if you're interested in that sort of thing. I think you really ought to think about this code here so that you can get started on your upskilling path or help your workers get started on their upskilling paths if you're doing that. Well, so thank you very much. Let's see. Oh, you're in a position in your IT career where you want to get into the cloud. Yeah. Okay, good. And you need the foundations. And I'm not sure I can follow a class. There's any book you can buy. Yeah, there are all sorts of books that you can buy out there. I think a consultant at Sunset Learning can give you even better advice. But as far as books are concerned, first of all, I would look for networking books that are published by recognized authorities in the field, not recognized authors in the field, but recognized authorities in the field. There's a difference. It's great to have an author who's popular or whatever, but I think it's important to talk to people who actually have done this for a living. So I'm not going to give you any titles. I am going to give you some advice, though. Is the person who wrote it actually somebody who works in networking or in the cloud or in security and then has written a book? Or is it somebody who's kind of a serial publisher of books? I'd rather get it from somebody who is a working person in the field. And that's what we do at CompTIA. We get people who work in the field to create stuff. So I think that's important. And you'll find Sunset Learning doing that. The other thing that I would do is take a look at the publishers who are truly respected in the field. And the way to find that, they can find the indicator of that, of publishers in the field, is not only how many books have been sold, but how should I put this? People who work in the field, when they mention, oh, I like this author or I like this publisher, that's something to think about. And that kind of goes back to networking. And when I say networking, I mean this kind of networking in terms of, say, LinkedIn. Ask people, some people, even if you don't know them, and ask, who do you read? If you're a working professional in networking or cloud or whatever, who do you read? And I think that could do a really good job of explaining how things go. And Carol, yes, you do have a good fundamentals class. That ITF is really cool because it teaches people who, let's say, are just starting out. Doesn't sound, Nicholas, you have some other areas. It sounds like you've already got some, that ITF might not be for you, but others who are just transitioning into things and about networking, it gives a great overview of all of the elements, and it could allow you to make some great choices. And by great choices, not just to become a networking pro or maybe a cyber pro, but you might be somebody who likes programming and development, creating stuff like that. So what the great thing about Tech Foundations or ITF is that it allows you to kind of sit back and go, okay, now I know what data and search is. I know what coding is. I know a bit about networking and infrastructure in the cloud and about cybersecurity, all those 4 pillars. Now I can make a choice that speaks to me, because in some ways, when it comes to IT, the IT profession or an element of the IT profession kind of chooses you rather than you choosing it. My point being, there's just something that's so appealing to some people. I know people who are coders. It's like, there's just something about it that makes me feel so comfortable when I'm in creating code. Now, personally, I don't particularly feel comfortable creating code. I can do it, but it's not a comfort area. Cybersecurity is an area for me that's comfortable personally for me. Right? Networking is too. I love Linux as well. So I love the cloud and the sys administration. And so I do coding and things like that to help me as a sysadmin or to automate certain cybersecurity tasks. But there are a lot of different ways in which you can learn this stuff. So, wow, I've brought us right up to time. So, folks, thank you so much again for those questions that you have. And I'm happy to answer any of those questions either via LinkedIn, and you can even, contact the folks at Sunset Learning. I think they're the best consultants for you to help you.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and click on the notification icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.